Hey, before we get started, just a heads up that we've got some awesome stuff on BJJ Mental Models Premium you probably want to know about. We've got some collaborative work with Andrew Wiltsey, with Margot Ciccarelli, and with John Thomas. At the moment, we're getting close to about 50 hours of premium stuff on there, and the library is always growing. Highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already. There's a free trial, so there's no risk. If you try it and you don't like it, I'll happily refund it because I'm pretty sure that you will like it. Hundreds of other people already do. Please do check it out if you haven't already. Premium.bjjmentalmodels.com. One more time, that's premium.bjjmentalmodels.com. Thanks again for supporting us and enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 191. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today, I am so excited for this topic. I am here with longtime jiu-jitsu expert, black belt, and BJJ Mental Models community member, Mr. Mike Mahaffey. Mike, how are you doing?
I am fantastic. How are you, Steve?
I am doing good, and I am excited for this conversation because we're probably going to say the exact opposite of everything that we normally say on the show here. You know, I get a lot of cool guests who are world champions, and they fly upside down and do inverted air bolos and stuff like that, and I think this conversation today is going to take a different direction. But before we get into that, Mike, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction? Tell everyone who you are.
Hi, my name is Mike Mahaffey. I am a first-degree black belt and under Chris Haueter in combat base. I train at Magic BJJ in Lansing, Michigan. I am not the school owner. I'm not a professional jiu-jitsu person. My good buddy Matt Linsemeyer owns a school, and we started training together back as white belts. I'm a social worker by trade. I help people with mental health disabilities find and maintain employment. And I've been a martial artist since I was a kid, and I freaking love jiu-jitsu. So that's about it. No world champions under my belt, or no world championships under my belt. No flying reverse barambolos, but just an old dude that likes to pajama wrestle.
And that makes you uniquely qualified to talk about this topic here today, which is old bastard jiu-jitsu. My favorite type of jiu-jitsu. I mean, yeah, look, it's cool when Lachlan and Margot are doing these weird matrix crab ride back take things. Look, I'm impressed by all of that stuff. But you know what really impresses me? When you can achieve the same result without really having to move or without having to try. That's the jiu-jitsu I signed up with, right? I look at these modern guys, I look at them going to Abu Dhabi, and look, these people are athletes. I didn't get into jiu-jitsu because I'm an athlete. I got into jiu-jitsu because, like so many others, I saw UFC 1 and I saw this dweeby little skinny dude from Brazil just tie a bunch of people up with his pajamas. And I thought, hey, if he can do that, so can I.
Right.
So that is what I wanted to talk about here today, because you and I have bonded over the years on this thesis of old bastard jiu-jitsu, this classical flavor of jiu-jitsu where you don't necessarily have to be an athlete. You don't have to be doing backflips. You're very economical in your motion. And Mike, maybe that's as good a time as any to turn this over to you. Tell me about this. Tell me what old bastard jiu-jitsu means to you. Like, how would you describe your game and what this means and why it's important?
So that is a great question. And I want to give you a little context to that, if you don't mind. I first tried jiu-jitsu in about 1994, right after the first couple UFCs, when I was way younger. I'm 50. I just turned 50 this year. And I'd been a martial artist since I was a kid. I'd trained in striking arts, boxing, Filipino Kali, karate, stuff like that. And tried jiu-jitsu back then for about a year, fell out of it for reasons that I'm not going to get into, mostly culture reasons around the school I was in, blah, blah, blah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Got back into it in 2006, and my reintroduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was with a gentleman out in California named Craig Husband, who is, I believe he's a third-degree black belt now under Rickson Gracie. And he'd been training under Rickson for years, since 1988. And I have family out in California, my wife's family, and we were out there to visit. And my brother-in-law knew him, and so my brother-in-law like said, "Hey, do you want to try this jiu-jitsu stuff? I know you're into all that martial arts or whatever." And I was like, "I've done it before. Let's give it a go." So I go to one of Craig's classes, and let me just say, I'm under Chris Haueter, and I love Chris Haueter to death. He's a wonderful person and a great martial artist. But Craig was like my first real jiu-jitsu mentor, and Craig is the epitome of old bastard jiu-jitsu. This guy is probably a decade older than me, maybe even a little more. He's about my height, maybe 5'9", 5'10". Surely doesn't weigh any more than me. I'm probably heavier than he is. I'm about 200. He looks like he's walking around about 185. He feels like a truck when he's on top of you. And the way I've described rolling with him is, think of like a marble statue that's come to life and can kill you. like you put your hands on this guy and you feel it automatically. You're like, oh geez, I'm screwed. I'm dead, right? I'm getting twisted into a pretzel. And his base is almost immovable if he doesn't want to move. And like, he just catches you with the least effort possible, right? In my opinion, that's old bastard jiu-jitsu. And that is what I try to bring into my game, and that's what I try to teach our students. And even though I'm not under Craig out in California, whenever we go visit my wife's family, I've been training with him 2 or 3 times a year every time we go out there since I started training again in 2006. And he's probably the next big influence on my game, other than, Chris Haueter and Matt and the people I train with here in Michigan. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I am excited to talk about this because so much of the modern jiu-jitsu discussion is kind of a clinical discussion and analysis of, okay, what is working at the highest levels right now? And so when you look at, you look at world championships, you're dealing with super athletes in the prime of their lives with cutting edge technique, just bottomless cardio, incredible athletic gifts. All of that is cool. But look, if you're listening to BJJ Mental Models, demographically speaking, I am almost certain you're not one of those people, right? Like, I know there is a very good chance you're probably pushing 40. You're probably not in amazing shape. You're probably a white or a blue belt. And so look, hey, nothing against going for the worlds. Okay. If you want to be a professional athlete, you have all of those athletic gifts and you're willing to devote 8+ hours a day, every day to train, and you're willing to sacrifice every aspect of your life to be a world champion, then absolutely, by all means, it's totally cool to look at what the best in the world are doing and pattern your life after that. But I'm just saying, I know that whoever's listening, you're probably not one of those people. You're probably a regular dude or dudette who got into jiu-jitsu for the reasons that we got into.
Right.
And when that is your constraint and you can't be training 8+ hours a day and you're just looking to use jiu-jitsu as a vehicle for self-improvement and self-defense and all of the good things that it provides, then there's diminishing returns, I think, to trying to follow that world champion lifestyle, because most of us just can't make that commitment. And that's where I think we go back to the old bastard jiu-jitsu, to the way that the old guys and girls did it, where it is an art of economics, economy of motion, taking the path of least resistance, minimal movement, energy conservation. I mean, yeah, look, it's super duper duper cool if you can do all of the upside down flippy stuff, but for a lot of reasons, that might not be possible for you, right? If you're older, if you've got a lot of injuries, it just simply might not be realistic that you can do those kinds of inversions. You might not have the kind of endless cardio tank where you just never stop moving and you're always going at full speed. And the classical type of jiu-jitsu, the kind of slow plodding style where you never give someone an inch and it feels like they're being run over by a steamroller. To me, that is always going to have a special place in my heart, that flavor of jiu-jitsu, because it's so efficient. And yeah, I know that if you go to Worlds, the modern stuff, it definitely works. But man, classical old bastard jiu-jitsu, that stuff works and it takes a fraction of the energy. And I love it because I know I'll still be able to do that 30 years from now. And to me, that's part of what I want out of jiu-jitsu is the lifestyle. So that is why I love this flavor of jiu-jitsu. And I think that it's inevitable. I think that everyone, once they get past the age of 40, their game is going to gravitate towards this style. But to me, I know some people don't view it as crowd pleasing because you don't see a lot of stuff moving, but to me, that's the purest form of jiu-jitsu, when you can achieve your grappling objective without having to move.
Right. Oh, it's boring as hell to watch.
Oh, it's hideous. It's absolutely hideous, which I think is part of the reason why people don't do it, but it's effective.
Right. And well, what's more important is how it feels. You know what I mean? Like, it's boring as hell to watch, but if you're in it, and either you're doing it or somebody is doing it to you, it's not boring. It's pretty awesome. Now, you mentioned Worlds. I love to compete. I compete as much as my body will allow me to. I'm not a great competitor, and you're right. You're not going to see people winning championships all the time doing this kind of jiu-jitsu necessarily, I think, but I don't think that's because this kind of jiu-jitsu sucks. And so, there are 20-year-olds at the gym who run circles around me, but they don't catch me. You know what I mean? And if we were competing and points were on the board, I may or may not be losing by points, but they're not catching me, and they're not necessarily throwing me around the mat either. Like, I am not giving up my base and my alignment, even if they quote unquote are in a superior position. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it jives very much with my experience too. I mean, the realities of competition are that you have a lot of win conditions at play that are going to probably make people hustle maybe more than they would want to. I mean, you've got things like time constraints, you've got points, and all of these things when you're in a competitive match, you've got to play to the rules. But when it comes to just the art as a whole and its effectiveness, the reality is, look, if you're in this for self-defense, you are not guaranteed to be fighting someone who's in the same weight class as you, who's going to play by the same rules.
Right.
And the thing that I've kind of had to come to terms with is, against a really good super athlete, I can't always dictate the pace just because they're bigger, stronger, more athletic, faster, younger, more resilient than me. So I can't do what on this podcast I always say I want to do, which is dictate the pace. Look, if this person is 20 years younger than me and they have triple the gas tank and they're willing to expend all of that energy and risk injury on the mat, then I've got to come up with the style that works around that. I'm not necessarily going to try to match their intensity, but what I am going to do is try to put forth that ironclad defense and that slow plodding aggression and eventually try to get them onto the floor. I might have to take my time to do it, but eventually get them onto the floor. And once I get them there, I know I can hold them there.
Right. No, 100%.
But it takes time, and you have to be incredibly aware of your energy expenditure. Because again, we're talking about jiu-jitsu for regular people here, not for super athletes. I know when I go in there with some 20-year-old who's just jacked to the gills, right? I know just by looking at him, look, I am not going to be able to go toe to toe with you. But what I can do is maintain my alignment, maintain my defense, and look for openings and conserve my energy. And that energy conservation becomes so incredibly critical as you get older because, look, I don't care how athletic you are. If you're 50 plus, you just are not going to have the gas tank that you used to. So managing energy becomes very critical as you get older in the sport.
Right. No, 100%. And I think as I continue to get older in this sport and art, the things that are more important in order to make my jiu-jitsu effective and efficient are things that are like at the foundation of the art in general, right? There's this kind of mantra that Craig said he got from Hickson that really spoke to me. These are the four things that underpin all of jiu-jitsu. And every time I'm training or I'm rolling or I'm in a match and I start feeling like I'm losing my way, so to speak, like things I'm doing aren't working and I'm kind of getting deeper and deeper in this hole, I try to remember to go back to this mantra and put it into place. Breathing, base, connection, and then technique in that order, right? So like the first thing I do is I make sure I try to control my breathing. Okay. I try not to like get overexcited and hyperventilate. I try to stay calm and keep my breathing even. I mean, yes, we are expending energy and doing athletic endeavor, and I may be old, but I still work out and try to stay in the best shape as I can so I don't get injured. So I've got some gas in my tank, but definitely not like a 20 or 30-year-old. And so I try to control my breathing. And then the next thing I worry about is my base, in that order, before any like technique or anything. Whatever position I'm in, bottom or top, do I have base, right? Do I have like a connection to the floor that I can use to absorb or impart energy into my opponent, either absorb or impart that energy, right? So that's base, essentially. A lot of people think it's like balance, and that's part of it, but it really has more to do, in my understanding of it, having like a connection to the ground that you can use like as a frame to either impart force or to absorb it. Right? So your alignment doesn't get broken. So my breathing, do I have base? Okay. And then am I connected to my opponent? Okay. Do I have a connection where I can push off of them or push into them or impart this energy into them so I can make my technique work? And then there's the technique at the very end. So like those are the fundamentals that I go back to when I'm training, and especially when I'm tired and feeling overwhelmed by somebody who's younger, stronger, faster, bigger. And that's like, for me, when the term that you coined, actually, you coined it when you did a review of one of my tournament matches I sent in a couple years ago through the Patreon.
It was a black belt masters match with these two old dudes, both bald, both with a goatee.
Right.
And I don't think 50 calories were burned between the two of you in this match. And it was like a 10-minute match. It was the epitome of old bastard jiu-jitsu. Like, talk about economy of motion. No energy was burned that day, but it was still a fight.
Yeah, it was fun. It was definitely slow, slow paced. If you'd watch like some of the 20-year-old blue belts that day, you'd think that we weren't even doing jiu-jitsu, that he and I were just laying there and hugging.
Well, I mean, you were, but in the most combative way possible.
Right. Exactly. But like, so when I think of old bastard jiu-jitsu, I think about those things: breathing, base, connection, and technique. And whenever I start to feel like I'm getting out of sorts in my training, I try to bring it back to that, and start from that framework, and then everything else in my jiu-jitsu comes off of that framework.
Yeah, I'm starting to think this Rickson Gracie guy might know a thing or two about jiu-jitsu. Seems like he's got some good ideas.
Yeah, he's okay. He's okay. I've never met the guy, and like, we haven't gone to California to see Teresa's family since January, and that was a one-day trip thanks to somebody getting COVID. On one of my nephews getting COVID. Yeah. So we just bailed. Like, we're not sticking around for this. We're going home. So I haven't been able to train with Craig and his gang for about a year. And I guess on occasion, Rickson will drop in, and it's never when I'm there. And I'm always so bummed.
Yeah.
I know.
I would love to train with Rickson at some point, because in my mind, at least, he seems like the quintessential jiu-jitsu old bastard. Like, his whole game seems like it's based on just massive economy of motion and just making things suck for your opponent to the point where they kind of have to yield. And to me, that's what old bastard jiu-jitsu is about, right? You conserve your energy, you put up a bulletproof defense, nothing can touch you, and then you just slowly just steamroll over your opponent bit by bit and take things away until eventually they lose the will to fight, right? It's that very classic or slow plodding pressure style that to me is so critical to jiu-jitsu. I mean, when Sanjay Hibera was on the podcast, he talked about that as the romantic version of jiu-jitsu. And he said, look, I know what all of these young people are doing, it works, but there's also this idea of this romantic idea of what jiu-jitsu is, kind of the classical jiu-jitsu. And man, there's something there, because that style is applicable to basically anyone. Whereas I don't think you could say the same for the modern style of jiu-jitsu, right? It is a sport and there is an athletic component, but the classic old bastard style, anyone can do it. And that's the beauty of it.
I remember being in a seminar a couple, 3 years ago before the pandemic, and the person teaching was teaching De La Riva stuff. And after a couple of knee surgeries, De La Riva just doesn't work for me that well. And I can't even remember the exact techniques we were doing, but I asked him, is there a way to modify this so it doesn't reef on your knees? And he said, no, not really. I'm like, oh, well, I guess this stuff is not for me then.
Well, That's an amazing segue. I want to pick your brain about this because one of the main differences I would say between the modern aggressive competitive style and classic old bastard jiu-jitsu is that, look, when I'm training, I am acutely aware of the risks to my body and I try to minimize them. I'm not likely to do a move if I know it's going to tweak my knee or throw out my back or something like that. And I think that sense of self-preservation is very much what plays into that old classic style, right? By keeping everything compact and by not leaving openings and not taking big crazy risks, you're protecting yourself and you're trying to reduce your risk of injury. And the older you get, the more important that becomes, right? Whereas if you're younger and your time horizon, if you're only concerned about what happens in the next 3 months because you're trying to win a world championship, you might be willing to take more risks than someone who's not in that mindset, right? For me, my big goal is not to rack up wins on the mat. My big goal is to advance my health and my knowledge of the sport and ideally still be able to train tomorrow. And I can't do that if I take big risks, especially as I get older. So to me, that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Most of the time when I've been injured in jiu-jitsu, it's because I was trying things that I shouldn't have been trying at my age. So I didn't really dive deep into jiu-jitsu. It was 2006, so I would have been 34, right? Like I said, I did it for about a year in the early 90s. My karate coach at the time, Michigan State University, had gotten the UFCs on pay-per-view and we watched them. And I was like, oh my God, I got to find that, right? But I was young and I didn't stick with it. So I really dove into it in my mid-30s. And every time I've been hurt, like really injured where it means time off the mats, it's been because I've been trying something that just wasn't like appropriate for my body or my age at the time, right? And I mean, not even like just fancy techniques. I had my adductor tendon torn off my hip bone when I was a blue belt because I was too freaking stubborn to open my guard when this stronger guy was trying to wrench my legs open, right? And like
yikes.
Yeah. And, in hindsight, this was a training role after class. Like, there's no medal on the line here, right? And I should have just opened, it was almost open anyway. I should have just opened it and played an open guard or gotten past and subbed. Big deal. Who cares? But I held on for dear life. And as a result, my adductor tendon went, so most of my injuries have been because I've been trying stuff that was inappropriate for my age or my body. And since I've started thinking more like an old bastard, I have not gotten injured. I won't try to escape things that I know that I'm going to have to twist or wrench or break my alignment to try to get out of. I mean, that's just silly anyway. I won't, force a position or anything if I am going to have to overexert myself for it. I mean, it's not like I don't train hard or want to try when I'm on the mat, but I feel like if I've got to really pull or push or grind to get this technique and make it work, I don't really have it right anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. That is a common thing too. And I remember having this exact problem too when I was younger. I mean, I started jiu-jitsu when I was, I want to say around 25-ish. And I remember going through the phase where, man, I was on the mats to win. And I was just as addicted to jiu-jitsu as anyone could be. You couldn't keep me off the mats. Right. I remember I was doing white belt takedowns with another white belt, which is never a good idea, but we were doing it. And I got his thumb in my eye. I think I've talked about this on the podcast. And he actually ripped out a chunk of my eye. Like when I went and looked in the mirror, there's visibly a piece missing.
From your eyeball?
From my eyeball, yes.
Dude.
I was such a young dumbass that I showed up the next day with an eye patch on and was like, I'm ready to go. I mean, in retrospect, I could have lost my eye doing that, but I was young and I was stupid and I wasn't thinking ahead. And the older I train and the more bastardly I become, the more I realize that like, look, you've got to learn to separate the battle from the war, and your goal should be to win the war, right? There's really minimal benefit to racking up wins on the mats when you're with your training partners. The goal there should be to learn. It should not be deathmatch mode. And Bernanke's been on the podcast talking about this, where he talks about how sometimes hobbyists are the worst for like going ham in the gym because they don't have a point of comparison. They don't have that point of reference where, oh, well, the competition intensity is X, but when you're on the mats in the gym with your buddies, you should be training a few notches below that. I didn't have that point of comparison because I didn't compete. So I was in there treating every match like it was a death match, and I was in there to win. And, you know, I would fight tooth and nail to get out of every submission, and you'd have to basically like choke me unconscious to get me to tap out. I am nowhere near that level of intensity right now, because at some point I just realized, like, what am I doing? Really, I'm killing myself for this dumb sport. I'm not getting anything out of it because there's nothing on the line. It's actually impeding my learning because I'm trying so hard to win that I'm not even really focused on what I need to do to learn. And I'm racking up injuries left, right, and center. And when I switched my mentality towards that more old bastard style, where I'm playing a defensive game in a lot of ways because I'm not taking crazy risks and I'm focusing on using pressure and control, when I switched to that, my injury rate just plummeted. And now I mean, I can train quite comfortably without any real fear of injury because I'm comfortable with my body and I know what works and what doesn't and what's dangerous and what's not. And I just avoid those dangerous scenarios.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. Now, you know, to address all the people that are going to hear this and say, what about training for competition? Like, it's a different thing if you're training for competition, right? But so I am no high level competitor. I do compete fairly often. I really, really enjoy it. I enjoy the atmosphere of it. I enjoy the whole experience. I don't win a ton, but I really enjoy the training for it. And yes, of course, like I'm going to Master Worlds in September. And of course, there are sessions of training dedicated to hard rolling and, you know, trying to get my points and, you know, play within the framework of competition. But I still have to do that in a smart way that is not going to compromise my body so I can be healthy to go out to Vegas in September and do it. And I know I'm not going to be a world champion. I mean, I've got like 28 people in my division now already or something crazy like that. The chances that I'm going to burn through all 28 of those people, as much as I'd love to say I might, are pretty small, right? So like,
well, you are an old bastard though, so there is a chance that all of those guys might just die before the competition happens, right?
They might. Oh my God, I just turned 50 and I thought, sweet, that puts me in Master 5. It's 51. So now I'm the oldest bastard in Master 4, basically.
My strategy for becoming a world champion is I'm just going to not compete until I'm about 80 years old. And then I'm going to enter Masters 20 or whatever the division is. And just by virtue of the fact that I'm the one with the least miles on my body, I expect to win. So that's my strategy.
You should do that. Although, you know, we're in the 21st century. By the time we get to that age, there could be like bionics. There could be all sorts of, so we could be screwing ourselves.
Cyborg grappling, you're right. That might actually change the game a little bit if robotics are allowed.
Right. Exactly. That would make old bastard jiu-jitsu more interesting, though, wouldn't it?
Well, with that said, Mike, I mean, if we were to try to break down like some of the core concepts or core tenets of old bastard jiu-jitsu, what would you suggest there? I mean, you already brought up some great examples from Hickson that I think align perfectly, right? Just some very, very base fundamentals that are really going to help you play a relaxed and concept-focused game. But anything else that you would suggest for people who are kind of going down this road where, you look, they're not a super athlete. They want jiu-jitsu classic. They want the type of jiu-jitsu that allows you to achieve an effective level of fitness and self-defense without killing yourself to do it. What do you suggest to people like that who kind of play a game or want to play a game like that?
So I actually was thinking about this before the podcast, and I'm glad that you asked, because I would say the first thing I tell people when I teach, whether I'm teaching old bastards or a class of 20-year-olds, is like base is probably, well, it's the second most important thing other than your breathing, right? So breathe, but don't give up your base ever if you can help it. right? So always make sure that you're in base in whatever position that you're in, because that's going to give you it's going to give your body the structural integrity to maintain your balance and to absorb anything that your opponent has got puts in you, right? So let's just take an example. And sometimes I struggle to describe jiu-jitsu with words, right? I'm a very kinesthetic learner. And when I teach classes, I'm all about like, well, come here and feel what we're doing. You know, feel this. You should need to feel what this feels like. So let's take the position you're in somebody's closed guard, right? So you don't want to get your posture broken down. You don't want to get tipped over or swept, basically. So you need to make sure that the first thing you do is make sure you're in good base relative to your partner. Okay. So what I want our center lines lined up, and I want my hips, if you're in closed guard and you're on your knees, I want my hips tilted up like I'm trying to pee on the ceiling. Chris Haueter says it in a much more vulgar language, so I'm not going to repeat what Chris says.
Yeah, no surprises there.
Yeah. You can cut this if you want, but Chris Haueter is like, tilt your hips up like you're fucking. I'm like, all right. Yeah, I love that guy. He's coming to Michigan this weekend. He's doing a seminar at our school, so it'll be fun to see him. He's a fun dude. But yeah, I think my youngest daughter was 10. Yeah, she was 10 when I got my black belt, and he came in and did a seminar at our school, and that's when I was promoted. And she was training jiu-jitsu at the time, so she came to the seminar, and Chris is like, "You get your hips up like you're fucking," and I can see Genevieve like over on the side of the mat. Her eyes are getting wider and wider.
I have a secondhand Chris Haueter story. So I've never met Chris in person. I've had him on the podcast before.
Yeah.
Thanks to you, by the way. You were the one who coordinated that for us.
Oh, the Hauters are awesome. They're cool people.
They're fantastic. But someone in the community, and I can't remember who said this, and probably that's for the best because I'm sure they would want this to be anonymous. But they told me that they were at a Chris seminar one time, and they were just sitting on the corner, just eating a bag of trail mix, just hanging out by themselves. And then Chris walked up to him and said, "That'll make you shit right," and then walked away. And that was his only interaction with Chris Haueter.
Yeah, that sounds like about Chris. That's perfect. That's perfect. So like say you're in guard, right? You want your center lines lined up. Okay, if you're in top guard, inside someone's closed guard, I want my hips tilted forward, because what that effectively does is it kind of locks my upper torso with my lower torso. So instead of hinging at the hip, if they try to pull me down, right, it makes it harder. So it's like they'd have to pull my entire body. It's like if they could tilt me up at my kneecaps, they'd be able to break my posture down. But since they can't, right, it lends that stability to my spine and my core. So it makes it super hard to break my posture. And I want to maintain that angle. So if we're head on, right, and our center lines are lined up, Steve, and I'm in your full guard, and I tilt my hips forward, it's going to be very difficult for you to just yank my posture down. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pull on an angle off to the side, right? And if I don't change my angle to match, then my posture gets broken. Okay, so I lose my base. All right, so that's one of the first things I teach people, especially like when it comes to this position, closed guard, is how to maintain your base on top like this. And we do this little drill where I'm in full guard, you know, my hips are tilted forward. I have you kind of test my posture and base by pulling on my lapels forward gently, like we're not doing it competitively. I'm not yanking like I'm starting a chainsaw. And, you know, but if my base is good, and then I have you change your angle and pull off at an angle, and I have to kind of turn my hips and torso while keeping that hip tilt and that alignment to negate the force going down to break my posture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's funny is this is something that kind of builds on something I just learned relatively recently. For those who don't know, on our premium service, we've got a 7-part series with Rob Bernacki where he introduces the BJJ Concepts framework of ideas. So it's a really good crash course if you want to get familiarized with his alignment framework and jiu-jitsu concepts in general. And also if you just want to hear me try to wind up Rob and make him go crazy for like 6 hours straight, it's a great place to do that because I sure tried. But one of the the things he brought up, for those who have heard us talk about this before, listeners probably know that I'm a big fan of Rob's alignment framework, which basically says that you can kind of break down jiu-jitsu into three broad concerns: base, posture, and structure. And I won't get into all of those because you've already talked about them quite a bit. And like I said, there's resources we have on this. But the thing I didn't know that I learned from doing this with Rob is that sequence is intended to be in order of importance. So base, posture, and structure are not equal. Base is the most important thing. And this makes sense when you think about it, because base is the thing that is going to scale the best depending on your athleticism and your opponent's body size and dimensions and what they try to do. Like the way that Rob defines it, posture, when we talk about posture, we're talking about the strength of your spine and the strength of your neck. And look, that's powerful, right? Your spine is very powerful, but there's still a pretty hard limit in terms of the amount of pressure you want to put on your spine. Yep. And same with structure, right? You're talking about using your arms and your legs as frames and managing distance with them. Well, there's a limit to that too. I mean, I've certainly been in situations where I wasn't framing properly and I injured my wrist, just because if you make a mistake with the way that you're framing, you can put a lot of pressure and stress on your body. And that doesn't even get into things like, what if you've got a medical condition that makes it hard for you to frame? Or what if you're fighting someone who is so much bigger than you that trying to frame against them is just a losing battle? So the one thing that is constant is base. And that is your ability to, like you said, absorb force, to generate force. It's about how you plant against your opponent. What happens if your opponent tries to push you? What happens if they try to pull you? It's your base that's going to allow you to adjust and accommodate to that. And base always needs to be there because it works against opponents of any size, right? If you're relying on things like your frames, well, now you've got a point of failure. But base is great because you can always be trying to move around your opponent to switch to a more dominant angle, to get out of the way of their attacks, to render their attacks useless. You can always do that as long as you have base. And of course, if you're talking about self-defense, base remains the most important thing because that's how you're going to run, right? That's how you're going to get out of there. Having good posture and structure are a lot less important if your priority is self-preservation, because your best self-defense strategy usually is to run away and get out of there. So base remains critically important above the other aspects of that framework. And anyway, bit of a tangent there, but I didn't realize that to Rob, that is the most important piece of the framework. And that aligns very closely with what you said about Hickson.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a tangent at all. And by the way, you must be a professional podcaster because I love the way you describe that.
I've done it a few times.
A couple times. I'm actually going to, when this comes out, I'm going to listen to it and use your verbiage in our classes because I love the way that you talked about that. That was pretty cool.
Well, what we should do is try to time this episode to be exactly 1 hour long. And then the class can be, you just make people sit and listen to the whole podcast for 1 hour. And that's it.
Matt, my friend who owns our school, would be so pissed. He'd take my keys away. Be like, you're done. We're losing students because of you. That's
but
hilarious.
Anyway.
No, that's a perfect way to describe it. And like, what was a revelation to me as I kept training was that you have base in any position. I used to think of base as only like balance, right? Like if you're getting, if you're doing stand-up grappling, if you've got bad base, you're going to get tripped or thrown easier, or if you're in top position on the ground, whether it's side control or top mount or something, you got bad base, you're going to get thrown off easily. But you have base on the bottom too. If Steve, if you and I are grappling and you take top side control, if I don't have good base, I'm going to be a lot easier for you to flatten out, for you to keep me flat, and for you to rip off any submissions that you might want to do. But if I have base, I've got a platform underneath you that I can keep the bulk of your weight off me, even if I can't escape, right? Even if escape is difficult, I can make it survivable down there. I can make myself more comfortable. Like the first thing I was taught when it comes to being in a shitty position is just try to make yourself comfortable. Like get to an angle where you're not suffering as much, and then you're likely to be able to do some work, right?
Yeah. Comfort is your body's way of telling you that you probably have good alignment, right?
Yes.
If you are not comfortable, that usually means that your opponent is twisting something in a direction that it probably shouldn't go in.
Yep. Or putting pressure on something that shouldn't have pressure on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite thing to do from top side control.
Well, that is also a tenet of old bastard jiu-jitsu, right? Is once you finally get on top, it might take some time and you got to be patient and conservative, but man, once you get on top, you stay on top. That's the idea, right? You take away all options from your opponent. Right.
And that idea of having good base has also helped me learn how to better put pressure on people, right? Like how to be heavier on top. When I didn't quite understand what base meant and how to get it, I was struggling to make myself heavy and doing what a lot of people do naturally, like you squeeze. Mm-hmm. But when someone's really heavy on top of you and doing it efficiently, like their arms aren't even active, right? It's gravity doing the work, right? You just learn where to put that weight and how to align yourself properly so gravity does most of the work.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure that out, that you don't need to be constantly squeezing and tense all the time. I really struggled with that for a while. And that is very important if you want to play that plotting pressure game, because a big part of what your opponent is going to try to do is they're going to try to push like crazy to make space and frame and get you off of them so that they can make space and get out. And if you're really tense and rigid, it's easy for them to push off of you. You're basically giving them a handle that they can push and drive against. But if you're loose and you're just kind of really relaxed and almost kind of like wobbly, if they try to frame against you, you just kind of wobble a bit and you just change the angle on them, and now their frame is useless, right? That's part of why when you are the person on the bottom and the person on the top is playing old bastard pressure, right? It feels, as the person on the bottom, you mentioned this earlier, it feels like there's a tractor on top of you. But what the person on top feels is quite different. They don't feel like they're a tractor. They don't feel like they're sitting there squeezing you as hard as they can. They're just hanging loose, right? They're just sitting there and being kind of loose and wobbly. And just every time you try to frame, you just adjust a bit and you just move a bit. It's actually very relaxed and low intensity to play that game. But it's funny because when you're on the person on the bottom having it done to you, it feels terrible. But as the person on top, it's actually quite relaxing and nice.
Right. Oh, it's miserable to be under there. I remember rolling with both Craig and Chris Haueter. I've only rolled with Chris once. I mean, all the time that I've known him, just because, I don't think he rolls at seminars anymore. I mean, he's in his 50s as well, and I can't blame him. Like everybody, you go to a seminar and you're a big name like Chris Haueter, everybody wants to roll with you, and you just get jacked up, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
who is it? Karol Pravik was the Silver Fox was talking about that on the podcast. Now he's got to be careful, right? Because there are going to be people who want to come and they want to basically like collect his name and be like, I tapped this guy. And so they, and those kind of roles get dangerous if that's a 20-year-old white belt who's out of control trying to do that. So when you get older, especially if you have a name, you got to be very mindful of that when you go into a seminar.
Oh yeah, 100%. I don't blame him at all. But it was last year. Yeah, last summer 2021, and I visited the garage and I did a private with Melissa, with Chris's wife, and Chris and the kids and everybody were there. And near the end of the lesson, like Chris comes out putting his gi on. He's like, "We've never rolled, so let's go." And oh my God, I mean, him and Craig Husband are the two that I've experienced that just kind of old bastard pressure where he's like barely trying, and I feel like he parked his Tesla on my sternum. It's like, okay, this is why you're the coach, Chris.
Yeah, I can relate. It's funny when I'm sparring with people. Some people that I know use a very dynamic style, especially younger people. My brother does this a lot. Mm-hmm. His style of control, he's not always sitting in the same place. He's got a lot of mobility, a lot of movement. And it's that kind of annoying type of game where, you think you're sparring with him and then suddenly he's on your back, right? It's the very modern jiu-jitsu game. My instructor, my coach, Don Whitefield, is totally different. I don't know if he's actually a senior citizen yet, but he's getting there. And he is like the quintessential jiu-jitsu old bastard. And it is way worse rolling with Don than it is with my brother. Because at least when I'm rolling with Matt, I can feel, when he beats my ass, I can feel like, okay, well, you know what? I got an excuse. He's a lot younger and athletic, and I made him work really hard. But when I'm sparring with my instructor, he's barely moving. He's not even breaking a sweat. He's just sitting there, like squishing me and giving me advice like, Steve, you need to just hip out a bit. Do you think I'm trying to? That's what I'm trying to do. Do you think it never occurred to me that I should hip escape to get out? That's exactly what I want to do, but you're not letting me because you're an old bastard, right?
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, so it's a very different type of control. And I remember, who was it? Margot Ciccarelli was talking about that and how there's different types of control. And what we call old bastard control is, she calls that static control, right? The idea being that you're controlling your opponent by preventing their movement. And that is a very classical pressure-based style, right? You basically just maul your opponent, take away their will to fight, and don't let them move. But there's also this other type of control that she called dynamic control, which is where you're allowing your opponent to move, but you're just moving with them and you're following them and you're exploiting their movement and their mistakes. And that's very much a staple of the modern game, where you see two people spinning around and it looks like a Looney Tunes tumbleweed and you can't even tell where the arms and the legs are. Mm-hmm. That type of style, it's very hard to do, but if you can do it, it definitely works, right? You just make sure that even if your opponent is moving, you remain one step ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. Definitely works, but I wouldn't call that old bastard jiu-jitsu. I guess that would be young bastard jiu-jitsu.
Right. You know, my friend Matt, who owns our gym, I mean, he'd technically be my immediate coach, right? He's a big dude. He's probably 225 or 230, and he's taller than me. And he's a little bit older than me too, maybe a year or so older. And he's definitely got the old bastard crushing style, but he's got some positions where he can do the dynamic control that you talked about. And he just floats. Like, it's crazy. He's such a big person. And then, like, if he gets on top of you, if he decides he wants to let you move and kind of funnel you into a worse position, he just floats on you. And I'm like, what the hell? Will you stop? Will you just sit still so I can sweep you? But yeah, that's not really my game very much. So I'm definitely much more of a plotter. You know, my first concern when I'm grappling is making sure I've got a solid base in whatever position I happen to be in, you know, top, bottom, wherever. And then I'd say, like, the second tenet, if we're going to be talking about breaking down old bastard jiu-jitsu into like tenets, is never give an inch back. Mm-hmm. Not never give an inch back. Mm-hmm. Right. So if we're rolling and I get to a position I want, I'm not giving it back to you. Right. If I'm isolating one of your limbs, I'm not going to give it back. I'm not going to give you the space back that I just took from you. I'm going to keep progressing. You know what I mean? Like moving that pawn on the chessboard to the back row to get your second queen, right? I'm not giving that up, because I see so many people, especially like our younger students, who play a much more dynamic game, where they'll take the space away and they'll achieve whatever objective it is that they want, and then they'll make some crazy mistake where they lose it, or they, you know, give up space, and their opponent's savvy enough to put a frame or a wedge in there and deny them what they just lost. Does that make sense? So
absolutely. Yeah, that is, I think, very much a tenet of the old bastard style, is whenever you get an inch, you never give it back. You just slowly, progressively take away options, increase control until your opponent has nothing left. It reminds me of how back in the early UFC days, the commentators used to describe Hoist Gracie as a boa constrictor, which I think is the perfect way to describe it. A lot of younger grapplers, you probably wouldn't describe their style that way, but the slow crushing pressure, the removal of options. Every time your opponent makes a mistake, you tighten it just a little bit more. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of motion going on. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea, is you're taking away those options. And yeah, that is something that I think is very particular about that older, more classical style, is it's about progressively advancing step by step by step, and you avoid doing anything that could risk losing what you've gained, because you don't know if you'll ever get it back, right? Mm-hmm. That is one thing about being an old bastard, is, you know, when you're in there with these young guys, you don't know, you know, if you make a mistake, you don't know if you're going to get it back again. So you've got to capitalize on it. And as a result, that's why I think that classical game, it very much follows a more traditional, like, sweep, pass, advance position, submit strategy. Whereas, for a lot of younger people, you might be doing things like bolos and crab rides and back takes. Mm-hmm. And those kinds of motions, they definitely work, but they do add a lot of motion-based variables into the equation. There's a lot of possibilities that something could go wrong and you could lose the position. And I never want to lose the position. So for me, that's just why that type of stuff doesn't really speak to me. I prefer the classical style, which is just much more slow and plodding and conservative in a lot of ways, because once I get an advantage, I never want to give it up again.
Right. Oh God, I'm with you. Some 22-year-old, if I let him up, if I'm on top and I let him up, I may not get it back the rest of the round. The rest of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I already burned my whole gas tank sweeping you and getting you onto the bottom. There is no way I'm going to let you get up again because I just don't have the energy to deal with this one more time.
Right. Exactly. I need to rest on top of you while I slowly constrict your diaphragm. That's the way I like to do it.
Well, that's one of the main reasons why you play this style is because you have so little cardio that once you get on top, you just don't want to work anymore, right? That's why that style's great.
So true. So true. Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
I don't know about you, but when I started jiu-jitsu, like almost everyone, I mean, I immediately lost a ton of weight and I was already pretty lean, but just jiu-jitsu, it does something to you, right? It's a hard workout, especially at the beginning. But I find now as I got older and more efficient at jiu-jitsu and I don't have to work as hard to achieve my results, I put the weight back on because I'm not burning. I'm just more efficient now and I don't have to worry about, losing all of my energy in one go. I'm just much more slow and deliberate. But I guess the result is I don't get as good a workout in.
Yeah, totally true. I'm struggling against becoming an old fatty myself.
Well, I mean, I guess to some extent that does just help bolster your old bastard game, right? Because once you get on top, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with you if you're carrying extra weight, so to speak.
Right. But hey, I don't want to be disqualified at the scale at Worlds this September, so I at least have to be careful until then.
That's true. I mean, the other strategy, this is my other world championship strategy, right, is to just put on so much weight that I get up into like an ultra heavyweight class and there just aren't any competitors there, so I win by default. That's my plan B.
If you don't have a coronary by then.
Well, yeah, there's definitely a science to this, right? Like, how do I get fat enough but not too fat?
Right.
I don't know yet. Maybe I need to talk to a nutritionist. I think there might be holes in this plan.
We're black belts. We should be experts in everything, right?
That is true. That's why I trained for so long, is I was told that once I got this black belt, I'm just immediately a font of wisdom on any topic.
Right. Eat all the cheeseburgers you want. You're a black belt. You'll be fine.
Well, man, I love this topic. This is something that I'm glad to bring back to the forefront because I think there is something there, right? I think there's something to be said about jiu-jitsu that is economical. It's easy. It requires less energy to burn. It's going to hold up even into your later years. It's going to reduce the risk of injury. There's a lot of reasons to look into this kind of game. But another reason I would like to put in front of you is changing lifestyle. I mean, I don't know about you, man, but I'm not the age anymore where I can spend every waking hour of my day thinking about jiu-jitsu. And I find it really hard to keep up with the youngins because they do so much tape study and they watch so many instructionals and they spend so much time on the mats. And I just can't do that anymore. I've got other priorities in my life and I can't just live for the gym like I used to. So I have to really pick my shots when I think about, okay, what do I want to learn? And I find that where I get the biggest result is if I focus on just generally applicable, timeless concepts, things that are always going to be true and that I'm always going to use. And I find a lot of flashy modern techniques. I never know if these things are really going to become fundamentals or if they're just trends that are going to eventually fade away. Whereas the fundamental pressure, old bastard stuff, that stuff is timeless. It's easy and you're never going to outgrow it. So to me, that's another reason why everyone should look into this stuff, because it is just, you're going to get so much more bang for your buck, especially if you're training for a long period of time, right? And I think it pays a lot of dividends once you get into your 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I also think that the concepts that we're discussing make every part of your jiu-jitsu better, not just the quote unquote old bastard parts better, right? And, I think we talked about it. I can't remember if we talked about this before the tape started rolling or not, but you get to a point in jiu-jitsu where when you're rolling, you're just kind of making stuff up on the fly, right? Did we talk about this on tape, or was that?
I don't recall, but you know what? I always say things twice anyway, so just go ahead and say it.
Because I'm an old bastard, I forget that I already talked about it. My wife is like, no, you told us that, Mike. I did not. Yes, you did. Damn it. But like, you get to a point in jiu-jitsu after you've been training for, a couple of years even, where you're not just rote repeating techniques, hoping they work. You're kind of making stuff up on the fly based on the positions and the things that are happening in the moment. And, I really feel like this style of jiu-jitsu is very based in concepts and not necessarily individual techniques. Put your hand here, put your foot there, wiggle your hips this way or whatever. So I feel like that is super beneficial, because when I'm rolling with somebody, if anything is going through my head, it's, okay, where's my base? Do I have good base in this position? Okay, no, I have to adjust. How's my alignment? Is my posture aligned? Is my spine straight? Is it twisted in any position? Oh no, I have to adjust. Okay, do I have the right angle here for this? And what angle do I need in order to disrupt my partner's base? Right. And then whatever technique I want to do can flow from that. So I think it's beneficial in terms of that as well. It's just like, it's less to think about while you're rolling, right? I'm not worried about, the exact foot placement or hand placement, although that makes a difference sometimes, right? But in general, I'm more worried about this conceptual piece of where my body is in space relative to my partner. And that's a really helpful way for me to think about it. Because like you said, I don't have the bandwidth to store all of these techniques or instructionals or remember the exact position of my leg or how many millimeters in I should have this collar grip or whatever. But I can remember these concepts that apply overall. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And that's something that I gravitate towards too. I mean, I am not great at jiu-jitsu, right? I don't train that much, especially since the pandemic. I am just a rote hobbyist. And so for me, my focus is getting the most bang for my buck with every minute that I spend, because I know there's people in the gym who are going to train a lot harder than me because they want to be pros. And I want to make sure that to the best extent possible, I can continue to improve as well in the parameters that I've set. And I find that focus on concepts help a lot. And, you brought up a great example about how deep should my collar grip be? I mean, to me, it's the question I'm just always asking myself is, if I wanted to pull or push this person right now, would I actually be able to move them? Like, would it do anything? That's all I really care about. I don't try to measure the distance between like my fingers and the little stamp on the back of their collar or anything. There's really no magic answer. I just try to get a feel for it. Like, if I gave this person a really hard tug, would they move? Because if they wouldn't, this is a crappy grip and I got to do something else. And just little heuristics like that are a lot easier to remember in the moment than trying to figure out what every step should be to execute that perfect textbook, whatever it is you want to do.
Right. Because, there is something to be said for practicing all those little details, right? But in the end, it never works in a live situation the way you drilled it in class over and over and over again. You're never going to get that perfect. It's super, super rare. So I think you have to focus, at least I do, I have to focus on these bigger concepts. And maybe that's why I started listening to your podcast. I don't know.
Well, thanks a lot, man. I greatly appreciate the plug as always. Before we tie this up, though, any other old bastard tenets that we need to disclose that we didn't talk about already?
Let's see. What did we do? We did base. We did never give up an inch. Pressure, I would say, is another one. Like, I always want to make sure that I'm making my opponent carry my weight from whatever position I'm in. Even on the bottom, right? There's a certain way that you can set your hips when you have somebody in your guard that makes them carry their weight, right? There's another drill that I do that I teach where I have put your partner in your full guard and they try to stand to pass, right? And most people don't know how to, I'm not going to say most people. I don't have like I'm not anything special when it comes to jiu-jitsu, right? But there's a lot of people who just wrap their legs around somebody and then like pull using their hamstrings, right? Like they're doing a hamstring curl to try to keep their partner from standing in their guard. With a certain way you can set your hips so your opponent carries more of your weight, right? So I want them to carry my weight whether I'm on top or I'm on the bottom. If I make them carry my weight when I'm on the bottom, it's harder for them to stand. It's harder for them to move. It's easier for me to get what I want. So I guess that would be the third tenet of the three. Base, never give up an inch, and always make your partner carry your weight. I always want to be heavy on somebody. I want to exhaust them because they're having to carry me around as well as themselves.
Definitely.
So if I were going to make three tenets, that's what I would say.
Nice. And I think one thing that's probably worth clarifying is even if you're on the bottom in a massively inferior position, so someone's got side control on you, or maybe they're mounted on top of you, even from there, it is still possible to kind of make them carry your weight. Not in the same sense that you're using gravity to just squish them, but if you're constantly moving and adjusting and just making it difficult for your opponent to stabilize, then they're going to have to work. Right? If the surface underneath them is moving, then they're going to have to work to accommodate that. So even if you're on the bottom, if you stay in motion and you never let your opponent settle down on top of you, you're just constantly making small motions so that they never really are able to secure the position. Just that little detail makes the person on top feel a lot less stable than if you were just sitting flat. And that's a common hack that I always tell people is like, look, if you're stuck in a bad position on the bottom, it's not about big explosive hip bumps or trying to bench press the person off you. Just be a little earthworm. Just always be making tiny little wiggly moves. Because if your opponent can never settle on top of you, now they've got to work. They've got to follow you. They got to track you. They cannot rely on gravity to hold you still. So even in those bad positions, there's still ways to make people kind of carry your weight and have to work.
Oh, 100%. It reminds me of back in my earlier days, maybe like blue and purple belt days, and going down to Los Angeles to visit my wife's family and dropping in on Craig husband and his training group and rolling with Craig. And he would let me take these positions, side control, mount, and I just wouldn't be able to do anything to him from there. And I remember one time he said to me, "You're technically in a superior position. If you're competing, you got your points. Why aren't you doing things?" Like, I don't like this. I don't feel stable. I don't feel good up here. Right. And it took me, a while to figure out, to really, like, he would show me what he was doing, but it took me a while to really get a feel for it, where, it's about how you compose your base underneath somebody, right? The angle that you take, in relation to your opponent. I always want to give my opponent an edge of my body. Is one thing that I've learned, especially from Craig. Like, you never want to present like the flat of your chest or your back to somebody. You always want to give them an edge, right? An angle. When somebody knows how to do that right on the bottom, it doesn't matter if technically you're in top side control and, maybe the judge is going to award you points or, award them points for being on top. Like, you can make somebody uncomfortable from on top there, right? And make them feel like they really don't have anything. I mean, it's happened to me. I've felt like that before. I've got the position, but I don't have anything. I don't like this. I need to move, right? I don't have control over you, right? I'm on top, but I'm definitely not in control right now. So that's another kind of old bastard trick.
Lots of tricky old bastard things. Oh, and by the way, I should probably point out that we are saying old bastard in a gender neutral way. You are not restricted to be a dude to be an old bastard. It's a state of mind. Anyone can be an old bastard. In fact, on the prior episode, the one before this with Emily Kwok, she talked about basically the same thing, although she had a very different term than old bastard jiu-jitsu that I will not repeat here in terms of how she described it. But anyone can do this. It is a technique and a style that, as far as I can tell, seems to work regardless of size or strength disparity. I mean, I'm not always the biggest, strongest guy, but I've been able to deploy this style against people far bigger than me. So I think it's kind of a universal style, and really anyone can put it into play.
Yep. Oh, by the way, I love Emily. She's amazing.
Emily's my hero.
Yeah, she's super cool. Did you see the technique video of my competition in June that she reviewed?
Oh, hey, yeah, that's an awesome plug. BJJ Mental Models Premium. If you're on Premium, then we do technique reviews for you. Mike's last competition review, Emily Kwok actually did the review for him. I was able to hook that up because I know Mike is a big Emily fan. So premium.bjjmentalmodels.com if you want us to break down your footage. There, I got my plug done.
Yep.
But yes, I was aware of that.
Yeah, and I would say to continue your plug, do it even if you lose, because you can learn a lot. Because I lost that last match and learned so much from Emily's feedback. So, you don't always have to show off you winning all the time.
Actually, you tend to learn more, I find, from losing, right? I mean, it is, if you upload winning footage, usually it didn't expose the problems in your game, right? I mean, It might have. Sometimes it did, but you must have done something right if you won. I mean, granted, you can still win and make mistakes, but the losses are the ones where you tend to get exposed a little bit more. And I find that videos where you actually lost tend to result in much better feedback.
Yeah, no, I agree. But if you're a premium member and you haven't taken advantage of that you 100% should, because it's a pretty awesome thing to do.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. And hey, if people want to learn more about the Old Bastard Way, where can they train with you? How can they get a hold of you?
So I train at Magic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Lansing, Michigan. Our website is magicbjj.com. The schedule should be updated on there. We're a combat-based school, but we're open to anybody of any affiliation. We live in University Town near Michigan State University, so we get a lot of people coming through that pop in and train with us. And y'all are more than welcome to come in. And Steve, if you ever find yourself in Michigan, our mats are your mats. You're more than welcome. I'd love to host you.
Am I going to get beat up by Chris Haueter? Because that sounds like a lot of fun.
He's in California. I think you're probably closer to Chris. Where are you? Vancouver?
Vancouver.
And that's on the west side of the country, right?
Yeah. But you know what? I've never been to Michigan, and I've always wanted to go. I've been to California a lot of times, but Michigan is right up there on my list. So maybe I'll see you soon.
You totally should. I would highly recommend coming in spring or summer, though.
Why? Are there like black flies that are going to eat my flesh, or mosquitoes?
No, winter sucks here. Winter's awful in Michigan. I mean, but you're Canadian, so you probably know what snow and ice is like. But spring or summer is the best. It's a beautiful state.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, man. And hey, I really appreciate you coming by. Thanks so much, Mike. I thought this was a fantastic chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. You're amazing. I appreciate the podcast, and thanks for everything you guys do.
You too, buddy. Thanks so much for supporting us. I really appreciate it. And of course, to everyone out there listening, same to you. I also truly appreciate everyone spending the time here to hang out with us every week. Thanks a lot. Hope you got value out of this, and talk to you next time. Take care.